All right, everyone, welcome to DevOps Office Hours. It's June 17th, 2020. My name is Eric Osterman. I'll be leading the conversation. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. We're a DevOps accelerator. That means we help companies own their infrastructure in record time by building it with you and then showing you the ropes. If that sounds interesting, head over to cloudposse.com/quiz to get started. Again, that's cloudposse.com/quiz to get started. For those of you new to the call, the format is very informal. My goal is to get your questions answered. So feel free to unmute yourself at any time if you want to jump in to participate. If you're tuning in from our podcast or YouTube channel, you can register for these live and interactive sessions by going to cloudposse.com/office hours. Again, that's cloudposse.com/office hours. We host these calls every week. We'll automatically post a video recording of this session to the Office Hours channel, as well as follow up with an email that you can share with your team. With that said, let's kick this off. So we have a couple of announcements I'd like to make. One is an announcement I brought up last week is that we have officially launched our contributors program. What that means is that if you are a regular contributor to Cloud Posse's projects, we have a couple hundred Terraform modules and other little utilities around there. If you're a frequent contributor and blocked on pull requests and would like to help out by reviewing other pull requests in exchange for getting your pull request reviewed maybe a little bit sooner, reach out to me on Slack. We have a private invite-only channel on the Slack team for contributors that we're using to try and expedite some of this code review process, just because it's been so much for us. I was looking over the stats. I think we've closed something like over 4,500 pull requests or something, and that's a lot for a pretty small team like ours. So the next announcement I'd like to make is there was a pretty awesome thing I saw float by in the AWS channel, which is that Amazon, after what feels like 10 years, finally supports the ability to programmatically and automatically refresh instances inside of auto-scaling groups. So no more hacks maybe around running lambdas and scaling up and scaling down and, I don't know, bash scripting here and there. This is a first-class feature now. I haven't been able to look into this anymore, so anybody who has, I was hoping you could unmute yourself and tell me more about it. All right, so I think my guess is Terraform will support this pretty soon. They've been really fast at onboarding these kinds of features coming out. So let me know if anybody knows more about the status of that feature.
Is this something that you would do in Terraform? It seems more of an ops kind of thing where, if you want to refresh some instances and do a new AMI or something.
I see it would be actually. So like, so the Terraform is declarative, and then we define our auto scale group. One of the just speaking off the cuff here, I think the way it would look is that you would have a parameter that you would set on the resource group for what to do if anything changes, right? And the default behavior can be none, or you can select one of these refresh profiles or however they're set up. So like if the launch template changes, then maybe you can get the instances to pick that up.
And it would do some kind of automatic rolling update of all the instances in the ASG to the new launch template.
Exactly.
Okay, I can see that.
And to your point, I don't think it should be mandatory. To your point, I think this should be a feature flag. But I guess that's how they would use it or implement it.
Yeah, I can see that.
It also makes doing deployments based around ASGs a little easier too. We have processes where to deploy a new release, we double the auto-scaling group size, wait for the new instances to come up and be healthy, and then have it, making sure that our policies say get rid of the oldest first, right? Now you can not have to set those policies or tweak that. You can just say, I want to refresh all instances, monitor it, and once it's done, oh, the old ones are out, the new ones are in. That's a lot nicer workflow than having to finagle that and control how they auto scale on your own.
You just made me think. I wonder if they have like a refresh. There should be like a concept of a strategy, right? Like there are different strategies for refreshing them. Whether it should and how many to replace. For example, how many to replace at a certain time.
Yeah, it looks like they go by percentages of healthy, which is a little bit of a problem because how do you define healthy? I right now define healthy in the load balancer, or by checking the load balancer health, not the auto scale group health, because the auto scale group health is incredibly limited. Although I think you can now set it to look at the attached load balancer, but you didn't used to be able to.
Yeah.
So that concerns me. Just looking at the article, that you only have minimum health percentage. You don't have a. I guess this instance warmup might take care of that. If you know it normally takes you 5 minutes for your instances to come up, you can throw, your 300 seconds in there or whatever. But
well, I guess ultimately it just means getting more robust health endpoint that maybe takes some of that into account. I'm not sure. That's the other thing, like in Kubernetes, right? We got the readiness endpoint in addition to the health check endpoint. I'm bungling the words or the terms, but that delineation is significant.
Yeah, I think, if the only way you have to control it is this min health percentage, you really have to pay attention to what, because like right now in my particular scenario, I manually check all that health because I didn't have a way to include our health checks in an auto scale group. Maybe they've added some options there, but previously it was just like, is the instance running? And once the instance was running, the auto scale group considered it healthy. And if it takes you another 5 minutes to install your app and dependencies with like Ansible or whatever on an Ansible pool, when your instance comes up, you could turn off good instances before your new instances are ready. So looks like they have a warm-up thing here though that would help though.
So yeah, here's the proposed interface for it in Terraform. Instance refresh enabled true, warm-up period, and then healthy percent. Again, that's just a proposal, so you can't implement it yet. Cool. So let's see here. We had a couple questions posted in the Office Hours channel, one that I nominated. Joey, are you on the call by any chance today? Or I see a Joey here. I'm not sure if it's the same Joey.
I am. Yeah, so I was kind of curious. I was looking into Canaries and maybe just getting some general feedback on how people approach Canaries. So for my use case, I've looked at Flagger, Spinnaker, and a couple other kind of relevant tools. I don't want to necessarily have to use an ingress controller. My service is exposed directly. I just run our web server there. So I don't necessarily want to put another piece of software in between, and I don't want to use a service mesh. It's kind of overkill for my needs. So some of the ideas that I've kind of come to so far are potentially doing like a Canary deployment and then splitting the rest of my deployment across a total of 3 deployments, 2 that have an HPA, 1 that is a Canary that is pinned to a specific number of pods, and just having 1 service use label selectors to forward traffic to all 3 of those deployments, so that I can continuously push to my Canary. I think that's kind of the kind of poor man's way about it, but I'm kind of curious if anyone else has any other ideas, feedback, or input.
One thing that just strikes me, just based on what you said, is I think that is a great way of doing it, just leveraging Kubernetes primitives. I would, if I were recommending that to a company, what they do, you should have your microservice chart for your, if you're using Helm, kind of a generic chart that implements your service pattern that you want to have, that has that construct you described here. And then every service uses that and automatically gets that capability out of the box. Yeah. I heard somebody else was going to chime in.
Sure. That sounds similar to what CodeFresh showed me when they were talking about Canaries. They deploy, they have a service, just a Kubernetes service resource that points at two different deployments. And, one of them is old, one of them is new, right? And so let's say you have 10 pods total. You would change old to 9 and new to 1. And then you would change old to 8 and new to 2, or, old to 5 and new to 5, and then, you would bring them all over to new. And then you would just delete old. And that way, because the service just round robins. I mean, that's all it does.
Yeah.
And that's another, that's a poor man's Canary.
So the trick becomes the operator here. Whether you're using some other job, some other step of your pipeline as an operator, or if there's an actual Kubernetes operator, ultimately this needs to be based on some kind of sensor, whether it be metrics or whether it be a human clicking a button. That's the part I'm curious about. Anybody have ideas how you would do that if we went with this poor man's Kubernetes Canary strategy with multiple deployments and a single service? I'd be really curious to see.
I mean, the work would be, I don't think it would be any less work than just going with, Istio or something.
Well, yeah. Okay, work is one thing. Complexity is another, right? Deploying Istio might actually be less work and getting all this working, and then you can use virtual services for that. But it adds a whole extra tier of proxying and abstraction and complexity that could be a lot to swallow for a team that's young to, say, Kubernetes and having to operate that. Look, I mean, you get so much more with this year, right? You get the telemetry, you get the tracing, you get visibility that you wouldn't ordinarily have. But I can see a case made for going either way.
It looks like Argo has a Canary deployment strategy. I mean, Argo doesn't do any kind of service mesh or anything, so I assume it does something like what we're talking about.
We have is it Adam? Adam Black? Are you on the call? No, and I think he's using Argo. I looked into this. That was Kubernetes operator. Are you using Joey? Are you using Prometheus by any chance?
Datadog.
Oh, Datadog. Okay. So I wouldn't have been surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some. Just thinking out loud here. With the 8 horizontal pod autoscaler, you can probably connect that with Prometheus metrics, right? Yeah. So
that's what I do for Datadog metrics. Yeah.
Yeah. So then when you can create an inverse relationship somehow, basically create it so that it automatically scales down when this criteria you need is satisfied, and it scales up the other one. The mechanics of that I don't have clear in my head, but that's how I could see it. If you can express this as a Prometheus query, then you can scale things up and scale things down and get your Canary automated like that.
Yeah, I think you're probably right there. I think to your point on actually shifting traffic and the operator being a human being, I looked around a bit yesterday and chatted with CodeFresh as well. I think the CodeFresh approach to kind of shifting traffic and spinning up a certain number of pods and spinning down based on the labels actually seems a little more complex than what I need. So I think I probably will just stick with a kind of just leave my Canary on all the time and just send a small amount of traffic to it by keeping it pinned to a small number of pods. And then I think I was just going to do like Slack notifications, and you'd mentioned, Eric, yesterday Gomplate and just
Wait,
sending.
is this why you wanted the buttons?
Yeah,
That's pretty
exactly.
rad.
I want to just send myself a message with, here's a link to the
Yeah.
dashboard. I've deployed Canary. Go check the dashboard. Look at metrics. Click
So
yes to keep going.
yeah, that's interesting. And since you're a CodeFresh user, I can certainly see a few ways of doing that. Whether you keep it in the same pipeline with approval steps, and then you can always use Helm to patch basically that release, and then increase or decrease the counts for anything. And then now to your point of having a custom a Slack message that you can then call a webhook to do the same thing, that would be cool too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the cheap and easy way around it, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Istio is a much better longer term solution, but there are hearts and minds to win to get there. So
yeah, you still got to prove your operational competency on what you have today, and that it's making business sense before doing the rest. That's good. Cool. We have another question. That was a good question, Joey. Thank you for bringing that one up. So Raul, are you on the call? Yeah, you are. I see you're
hello.
Yeah, you're asking here in the office hours channel, a kind of provocative question. I'm not sure. Is AWS moving away from Docker? So you say that AWS Fargate 1.4, the latest version, is using Containerd instead of Docker as the runtime engine. Anybody have more context on this?
Yeah, I can explain what when that this message come to me. Like, this thing is, we are having a periodic meeting with AWS every once in a month. So they will suggest us what is latest currently available with them. So currently we are using EKS and node groups. So they suggested to use EKS Fargate, and they point out that it is a newer version 1.4 is released for EKS Fargate, and it uses Containerd as a backend runtime engine for running our container instead of Docker. Still 1.2, Docker was the runtime engine. From 1.4 onwards, they removed Docker and they are moving ahead with the Containerd. That will be there. It is in their roadmap, they said. So I don't know what is going to impact the current containers. Also, the other thing I wanted to add to this information is they are suggesting ECS over EKS. Okay, so the thing is, when the 1.4 EKS Fargate was released, this classic load balancer and NLB is not supported for 1.4 AWS EKS Fargate. But in the case of ECS 1.4 Fargate, NLB, classic load balancer, all these are supported. And we asked them why it is not supported in EKS Fargate while it is supported in ECS Fargate. And the funny answer given them was ECS is their special child, and they want ECS to be
right.
promoted.
I'm not surprised by that answer, and it's been kind of evident that that's their position. It feels like they're deliberately crippling Kubernetes sometimes in AWS, but it's gotten a lot better. I think Amazon has kind of, the more Amazon can get customers onto ECS, the more vendor locked they remain, versus EKS is just, or Kubernetes is just, supporting a more open ecosystem, which hasn't been really Amazon's approach. This is just my editorial comment here. I have no insider knowledge on this.
Okay, well, the one thing I want to point out here is I don't really now also I don't know how this is going to affect our containers, like if the backend engine changes from Docker to Containerd. So when I asked them this question, they said you can put your containers in ECR. Why you want to put your containers in Docker Hub?
I honestly, unless you're doing some esoteric stuff with Docker, beyond like, you know, what most people are doing out of the box, I wouldn't anticipate any problems. I do know, so we have our Terraform module for EKS instance profiles, and we have dabbled with it, but there were a number of limitations. I don't remember all off the top of my head, but they were significant enough that we didn't run with it. But moreover, the reason why I didn't like it is it took like minutes to start pods as opposed to milliseconds to start pods using EKS Fargate. I don't know if that's still the case. If anybody else has more insight on that, let me know.
So from the containers roadmap, you can read that Containerd is a popular CRI and it's more efficient than Dockerd. I'm not an expert on the matter,
yeah,
but this is what is in
what it felt like was
about.
happening before was Amazon was spinning up an instance for every container for isolation and security, and that's why it was so slow. That's me just guessing, because that's how slow it felt.
Well, it's written exactly that Containerd is more efficient comparing to Dockerd.
Okay.
So this is exact comparison. And this
Yeah.
could be a reason, but we don't know all of it.
Yeah, I would actually welcome that. You know, as somebody who's currently using Fargate, it does take a while, not necessarily minutes for our containers because we keep pretty lean, but it does take, you know, I'd say maybe a minute, which is still pretty, you know, still pretty long.
Oh, interesting. Did we? Yeah, no, yeah. Here's our first pull request. We only had like one, I guess. But yeah, here were all the limitations with Fargate. This is back in December of last year. I don't know how much of this has changed, but I'll link to that in the office hours channel if anybody's
yeah, I
interested.
joined a session of AWS like 3 or 4 months ago. I mean, it was not that slow, to be frank. It was, you know, they announced that they are using micro VMs, stuff like that. Yeah, it became not minutes, but I've seen it's like in 10 seconds, a new container deployment was, you know, deployed on the Fargate. It's not that slow, I would say.
All
okay.
the way into a running state.
Yeah, running state.
Oh,
yeah. And,
okay. Well, yours are getting into a running state faster than mine are. Then mine take, you know, about a minute to go from provisioning, pending into running.
Probably they are, you know, maybe they have pre-made, no, it's waiting for for new deployments to be made on the background, and they are making things faster. I don't know, but it is obviously a bit faster, I would say. Not
That is good news. Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Might depend on the size of the image as well, right? So if the image is big, then
Yep.
we need running it maybe.
Yeah, that
Not
will
much
affect
we
it
can
for
do, but-
sure.
Speeding that up. Cool. Any other questions anyone has? It's just really an open mic here. You can ask. We're about 25 to 27 people on the call here, so feel free to ask away.
Anyone has any experience with ECR image scanning? Are you guys using anything like that as part of your CICD pipelines, or like to flagging the builds, deployments?
I use Anchor, but I don't do it. I don't scan the registry, even though I know it can. I use Circle CI, and I use the Anchor org to scan the container before I push it to ECR.
So do you block it if you see some critical issues, or is it just like for information purposes?
I do, yeah. So when a service is being built before it reaches into production, I don't scan it in, you know, like a sandbox or a dev environment. But once it goes into a staging deployment or a production or a PCI environment, then I enforce scanning, and I will fail the Circle CI build if it has any. I think it's a medium or over is when I fail it.
Okay.
So you're not, are you also combining that with labels, Docker labels, or Brandon?
On some, yeah. Not everything. It's, you know, service to service, but yeah.
Yeah. I'm playing with ECR image scanning. I played, but the thing is, like, it takes some time to get the results from the ECR image scanning. So you need to hold the pipeline for the results to be ready to get the results, or you need to do it in a asynchronous way to update it.
I thought about doing that, actually scanning, you know, because tags are mutable, right? So it would be nice to also scan the ECR registry in case anything gets committed that shouldn't. But right now I'm just, I'm doing it during the build before I commit anything to the repo it gets scanned.
Yeah, just for the others, like, it's a free service from AWS, so you don't need to pay anything for it. If you enable it on the ECR site, you can enable it to scan as on push. So whenever you push a new image, it scans and publishes the results there.
Yeah.
Just looks good.
Yeah, and it's supported by the Terraform module. It's just like a flag to enable.
Exactly, something simple.
But it is interesting. So I mean, yeah, we enable the flag just to enable the flag, but haven't actually developed a policy around it or enforcement or escalation of that, right? Which it's so easy just to enable this, but then how do you create the processes and everything else around it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. And that's always in AWS, that's always left up as an exercise.
Yep.
Yep. Do you guys use any other tools for scanning, like security scanning, other than image scanning, like while scanning?
Yeah, I use Trivi for that. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. The Aquasec company, they provide a free open source project called Trivi. Actually, they were using something else. But Liz Rice, I think, couldn't able to develop it more, so they have somehow acquired an open source project called Trivi. So I think it's better when compared to the AWS ones.
Trivi scanner?
Trivi, yeah. TRI.
Oh, by Aqua Security. Okay. I'll post the link in office hours.
Does Trivi do CVEs, or does it do, you know, file system configuration stuff?
No, it is the CVE based, not file.
Okay, yeah.
For hardening, whatever.
There's a bunch of different ones that do CVEs. There's, like, you know, Twistlock, there's Claire, there's, you know, a bunch.
Rapid7 has one too, Qualys has one. Canaries has one.
The other thing that we do, other than just CVE scanning, is OpenSCAP, which is doing configuration scanning. So it's got a ton of rules, and there's a bunch of different sets you can use. We use, you know, the government's DISA STIG set of rules, and it goes through and it looks at, like, okay, your yum configuration file, does it say that you know, TLS must be checked? If it says, you know, don't check TLS or whatever the actual configuration is, then it'll fail that particular rule, because it's looking at all the configuration in the it's been around for a long time, but just, you know, recently it's been being used in containers too. Policy
management, yeah. But SCAP is the configuration XML is terrible. I hate it. I used it. I didn't, but I don't like its configuration. It is too much burden.
Yeah, I mean, we're lucky that, you know, the government has done all the configuration, because they have this published set of rules that that you must be compliant with, you know, and you just feed that into OpenSCAP, and it, you know, that's all the configuration, right? So I just have to run one line.
What was OpenSCAP?
Yeah.
The policy management, like, you know, do you know the CIS security benchmarks? So they have implemented CIS security benchmarks with a special tool. Even Red Hat uses it for its, like, you know, when you install a Red Hat Linux system on a bare metal or, you know, virtual instance, you can enable it. So it basically goes through, for example, you know, changes the SSHD config and disable the permit login from, you know, root from yes to no. So you cannot log in as root, or, you know, changes the length of the password policy, whatever, you know, those operating system configuration files. So it goes over that and checks it. And also some of them can change it like, change value to from, let's say, 2 to 3,
Yeah.
or enable, disable, things like that.
Yeah, OpenSCAP's got a remediate flag. So if you set remediate, then when it sees things that it knows how to change, then it'll change them. But I mean, I would say unless you have regulatory compliance issues that you have to the juice is not worth the squeeze.
That could be the case. It's just kind of reminding me of something we're kicking the tires on right now. It is a bridge crew, and it does static analysis of your Terraform code to identify recommendations according to various levels of compliance. So it'll tell you like which benchmarks, you can filter by which benchmarks you're not compliant with. And it's continuously looking at all of our repos on GitHub.
I mean, if you have used, if you're an old-time Unix engineer, like, do you remember Bastille Linux? I mean, any guys remember that?
Remember what?
Bastille Linux. So it does the hardening of the operating system. Like, there's a bunch of scripts, you simply install it on the operating system and you just run it, and it goes all the configuration files and hardens everything for you. Then CIS hardened operating system, I would say. It was a very old project, like maybe 20 years ago. I'm not sure if it's around anymore, but let's say that's secure by default operating system.
Yeah, there's a need for some more of that type of stuff in this new ecosystem. Secured by default, maybe modules, Helm charts, cluster configurations, etc. Made me so all this talk reminded me of something that I don't know where I saw it. I think it popped up in SuiteOps somewhere. There's apparently some threat out there that's exploiting some public Kubernetes dashboards and looking for systems running, I forget what it was running, basically launching the Monero crypto miner in these Kubernetes clusters. And it just made me think of like, we've had to run virus scanners on our workstations and stuff on Windows, at least for decades. This is going to be the new norm in Kubernetes. I hope not.
Oh boy.
The possibility of this happening isn't too far-fetched, right? Just like these npm packages that have gotten compromised. What's to say, Docker images out there aren't going to get compromised with greater frequency and then running these kinds of nefarious containers.
Yeah, Kubernetes dashboard has a lot of permissions, so it's always risky to expose it.
Yep, totally. So, cool. Any other questions?
Yeah, kind of on the topic of containers and ECR. I think I'd mentioned this a couple weeks ago, but with K.io going down a couple times recently, I had started looking into Harbor, but this is also not a trivial exercise to move everything to kind of an intermediary pull through cache. I was kind of curious what other folks are doing, or are you just kind of living with risk if you're kind of exposed to this Docker Hub and K and other third-party repositories going down?
I set up, so we had been previously using Quay as our primary image repository, but I set up ECR recently, and now I just push to both. And then our Helm charts have a way for you to override the image repository. So we just, if ECR were to go down, we can just override it and say pull from Quay instead.
But does that include all of kind of the periphery services that you run in your cluster, or is that specifically for your your specific Helm charts? Like I'm assuming there are other things that you're running in the cluster that may come from third-party repos.
Just our specific Helm charts. There are a few services that we use that do pull from Quay. I believe like Prometheus, that we haven't figured out a fix for that. But then something like Prometheus we don't deploy often, so like you can usually just wait it out for Prometheus. But for like our applications that we actually deploy, we do deployments all day, every day. So like we cannot have Quay down for 13 hours, and so we kind of just moved off of using it as the primary one.
So I think there's a mutating admission controller example for rewriting your URLs automatically, the Docker image URLs, to use a different endpoint. So if you did have a Docker pull-through cache deployed, presumably on a different cluster, or standalone, that would be an option that you could have. At the very least, you could reject anything from launching that isn't using a trusted repo, and then you can identify early that you have this problem before you get to production. So I think it's probably better to do things more explicitly and just reject it than do it transparently. I know, Brian, like this has come up a few times between West LA DevOps and other things. So
yeah,
I'm constantly thinking about it.
Yeah, for me, just pushing to 2 different image repositories fixes like, or covers like 99% of the cases, but there is definitely a lot more engineering effort in regards to doing pull through cache, stuff like a pull through cache, but we haven't seen a need where, or like we haven't had an issue where Quay is down and we needed to deploy this random dependent service that we have. And I would say for the most part, you could probably just sit it out, especially with the types of services that are being used that do host their images on Quay. Things like Jaeger, maybe you're not really deploying those on a daily basis. And then I think for the cases where you are deploying something daily, like your actual product or whatever, having 2 image repositories that you can rely on hosted in different areas probably solves that problem pretty easily.
Can I ask a little follow-on question to that though? If you had a node, like an autoscale event in your cluster, and you added a new node, now you don't have a cache on that node, and it's going to go try and pull from the authoritative source. Would you still, like, even if the authoritative source is still down, even if you don't change it, would that still be like your node's not going to have that locally cached?
But the pull-through cache would be an external service, not running on the node. Yeah. You should centralize the pull-through cache, both so you can reduce the amount of data that you're pulling in to your VPC externally and speed up your pulls, but also for availability.
Yeah, and I guess to Robert's question, that's the exact kind of scenario that kind of concerns me more so than my app. Like I know my app and ECR are probably going to be fine, but there are kind of periphery services like maybe not AWS Node, but like the Datadog agent and
Node Exporter,
Cube.im and kind of some other periphery things that when a new node starts up and I do have a scaling event, then I'm kind of up a creek.
There is something called Fracking that was built by Uber that kind of solves that problem as well. They basically host what they call like an image repository cache on the cluster itself, and then uses that as the first source before it pulls from others.
It looks like it's still actively maintained too. Has anybody used or kicked the tires on Fracking?
It's a 900-pound elephant, you know, kind of in the same boat
It looks like it.
as
Yeah,
like
it does not look like a simple
Spinnaker.
architecture.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, Uber runs their whole freaking company on it, but it's Uber, you know, they do all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah. Oh, what team are you on? Oh, I'm on the Kraken Docker image team. We're about 10.
I actually have another random question, kind of a bit of a tangent or a separate topic, but I was recently playing with Rook. I was trying to figure out a way that I could provide an abstracted cloud native interface for storage where I could eventually have the actual backend be either S3 or AWS Blob Store, etc. Does anyone have any experience with Rook or similar? I think there are a couple other options, but it seems like Rook is kind of the 900-pound gorilla there. But I
similar to MinIO,
yeah.
or is like an abstraction around.
Well, but MinIO isn't that just? I thought MinIO was just
No.
object storage.
MinIO is, you know, run S3 yourself. Rook is a lot more than that. You know, Rook is like run EBS yourself, you know, run, you know, yeah.
Yeah, the thing that concerned me is I was within like 10 minutes. So I got it up and running in Azure and in AKS, but I was able to brick it in about 10 minutes because I was able to fill up disks and it didn't resize my virtual disks fast enough. And I lost quorum and all of a sudden things stopped working.
Sounds like a bluster.
Yeah. So I was kind of curious if anyone has actually used Rook in production environment and if they have any feedback.
I'd be curious though, like, I mean, the only advantage I'd see to doing it yourself is if you're on like bare metal in an environment where you can't rely on the services provided by your platform and had to provide the platform yourself.
Yeah, I was thinking more around the lines of cloud portability at some point. So if I wanted to pretty easily shift between Azure and AWS or GCP based on whatever deals exist, this kind of theoretically makes it easier for me. But yeah, it's very much theoretical at this point. I think
there's a good talk by Mitchell Hashimoto on multi-cloud. And the key takeaway that I have was like, you don't choose multi-cloud, multi-cloud chooses you. So planning for it is maybe not the best thing. Instead, what usually happens is your company acquires another company and they're on Azure. Now you got to make these two things work. Also, what I don't like about like thinking about it in the academic sense is you're kind of optimizing for lowest common denominator and not maybe maximizing the options of each platform to do the best architecture there. So I wonder if it's abstracting at the wrong layer, I guess, is the concern.
If you had to choose
Andrew,
one,
though,
I
you
would.
have some thoughts on this because you have to. You don't have that option. I forget what the policy was that where you guys are at. You have to do open source first for everything or something, right?
No.
Oh, okay.
I mean, they want us to because they think labor costs nothing and spending $1.99 on a license is too, you know, a no-no. What I would say about Rook is if you're going to pick any of the storage operators for Kubernetes, Rook is the one I would go with because it's the one blessed by CCF. You know, Rook Ceph is something that you hear a lot. You know, when you go to KubeCon or whatever, a lot of people are using Rook Ceph, which is the Ceph, you know, operator for Rook. Ceph is a storage provider.
Okay.
Cool, thank you.
Sure. Well, a total non sequitur here, but an announcement I should have had and forgot to make is a kind of exciting one. I know there's a few people on the call using CodeFresh, and today they've taken something that was previously strictly an enterprise feature, and I believe they've opened it up to a greater number of people. So you can, if you're, I think, just a regular CodeFresh customer on a paid account, I think, I haven't looked too closely on it, but using the CodeFresh runner you can now deploy that on-prem and then give the CodeFresh runner, instance profiles or not instance profiles, what I'm saying, IAM roles or service accounts, so that you can run privileged operations on-prem, but run a managed dashboard, the SaaS component of CodeFresh. So check that out.
Looking at their pricing page, it looks like you can only run one runner concurrently.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's how they get you right now. So it's they're letting you kind of test the waters to run a few things on-prem, but you do probably then need to have an enterprise contract to scale out that way.
We pay for a few extra large boxes on CodeFresh just because of our front end app concurrently running a bunch of UI tests, Selenium tests all at the same time, and using a bunch of like Chrome browsers to run those tests. And so I was curious. I wasn't thinking of like migrating all of our CodeFresh pipelines over, but to like for ones that are more CPU or just resource intensive, run on a CodeFresh runner. But the fact that you can only run one concurrently is a non-starter. So it's
Yeah. Oh, that's
because those boxes are pretty freaking expensive. Even on the annual plan, pretty chunky.
Well, thanks for adding that additional info.
At least that's what I gathered from the pricing page. Maybe if you go and look at it, maybe
let's pull it up.
If you take a look, that's what it seemed like to me. So like if you like toggle large all the way up to like 10 or whatever, it still says only one. I assume you'd have to pay for more.
It's kind of a weird slider. You can't slide it down and you can't slide it up. It's just one, period. So yeah, basically it's got to be negotiated for more than one.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry, Alex.
I think the other interesting thing, though, with the runner is it sounds like it would let you do things that CodeFresh SaaS runners would not, which is, maybe something like run a privileged container.
Yep.
Or, what Eric was saying earlier about using IAM service roles.
Yeah, in their blog they say you can like run on GPU as well. So
provision database users and accounts for like an RDS instance that's private. Another use case we've had to have.
It's really nice once you get to the headaches of getting the CodeFresh runner service account, assume role privileges, it solves a lot of problems and can run behind a firewall.
Yeah. Yeah, you're doing that today, Rob, right?
Yep.
That's cool. Cool. We got another 10 minutes or so, 5-10 minutes. Any other questions?
Yeah, I want to see how you guys are handling. So say we have our data centers, on-prem data centers, and we have a direct connect between the data center and the AWS. And then there are other VPN links and all that stuff that is kind of not visible to us. So there is a networking team managing those. So I'm wondering if you guys are using any tool to track the latency between your AWS account, your VPCs in AWS, and your on-prem data centers, along with any connectivity issues, like, because sometimes the latency is jumping up and down, and then I don't have data if I face an issue, whether it's something network related or not on my site. I feel like I want to have some data for that so I can relate some of the issues to it. So, but there is no, I think, out of the box solution from AWS.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. Somebody else here has dealt more with that. Not what you're asking, but something related.
There are a lot of.
This is the only thing that just came to mind. Just total like non sequitur. It's kind of cool. Like this tool will just tell you the closest AWS data center to where you're at, but that's not what you're asking. I'm just,
No, no.
just maybe.
Just to be clear, so you have direct connect from on-prem to AWS location, and you also want to measure VPC, but how will you distinguish routes?
No, we have multiple data centers, right? So some of them are on direct connect.
When you say a VPN connection, then I understand it's a failover one for
That's
direct
correct,
connect,
but
yeah?
we have some data centers, they don't use direct connect, so they are using the VPN. So I would like to have an idea of how is my connectivity, like how is the latency, how is it going up and down,
Sure.
if there is any connectivity issues happening, because I
think the easiest one would be to deploy something that you can ping and send a request to, and the other thing would be Prometheus black box exporter, so you can measure virtually anything with it.
I saw there
and then collect metrics if you use Prometheus.
Yeah, there are some open source tools out there like Zabbix and other things. They look like a little bit old world, so I wonder whether there is anything that is more cloud-based.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
So from AWS, there's no such thing.
I saw there is something called Zabbix.
Yeah, this is I think this is a fork of Nagios eventually, but yeah. So it depends on what monitoring do you use?
We use New Relic for API, but the New Relic will not capture this information, right? I need to push those metrics to it somehow. Either I mean that's also some custom.
You can create your own plugins and
yes,
and you can do it with that. So basically, you need an application. Either it depends on where your monitoring is centralized. If it's on AWS, then you need an application in on-prem, and you need to measure latency from AWS with New Relic plugin to your on-prem. The problem will be if you, for example, have a direct connect and a VPN connection, then the main route will be the direct connection, and you need to have access to network device to actually measure a latency through the VPN because it's not used by normal networking then.
I'm more interested in it from from my perspective, right? So how do I see the connectivity? So I would like to run the pings within my VPC.
Yeah.
So that's eventually how my applications will be impacted, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So some kind of application and a black box exporter from Prometheus will work.
Okay.
I mean,
you can
by the way,
if
all
TCP
tools
is
like
open and if ping goes through, stuff like that.
Something like SolarWinds, I think, yeah, SolarWinds can provide some visibility on that a bit. Yeah, it is mainly used for network latency stuff. So you need to install the agent of it, but it will help you for things like that.
Yeah.
You know, to find out the latency. SolarWinds is very popular on the networking world, so you may maybe wanna use that.
So that's free open source, or?
No. SolarWinds is a product like WhatsApp Gold, SolarWinds. Yeah, they are they are not free. They are not free.
Okay. Yeah.
Looks like Terraform beta 13, beta 2 just dropped.
Yeah, I heard it was coming soon, like within the next couple of months.
Yeah. What? My guess was going to be like some kind of a HashiConf, right? That would be the time. But anybody kick the tires on any of the Terraform betas yet? The 13 beta?
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Yeah, definitely no time for that.
Yeah, fair enough.
I mentioned in the Slack channel, but I recently started playing with Local Stack. It's pretty slick. If you guys haven't heard of Local Stack, you can essentially kind of simulate a local version of AWS. It's pretty pretty neat. And I did the 14-day developer program, or like the trial, and I think I'll stick with it for a little while and just pay the $20 a month or whatever, because they, I think within a couple days, responded and added a service that wasn't there yet. So they're super responsive, super friendly. So
that's cool.
Pretty cool.
So Zach, he's a regular contributor here. I don't know if he's on the call today, but Zach just deployed Local Stack in Kubernetes, which is a kind of interesting way of doing then some integration testing without incurring the costs of AWS services.
Yeah, and I think I read his blog post. I think that's where I saw it first, was he posted it there. And I read that and I was like, oh, I think this could actually be helpful for me to test my service. So now I basically have my local setup in Kind or Minikube, and it's pretty easy to do some integration testing. Well, integration testing and just for local development in general. Just makes it super simple.
Yeah, here, this is, Zach Lober. Let's see, I'll find the post. AWS testing with Local Stack and Kubernetes. I'll share the link for those that are interested in that. Zach's really awesome, by the way. If you guys haven't seen some of the stuff he posts, he's on the bleeding edge of everything happening out there. All right, everyone. Well, it looks like we've reached the end of the hour here, and that about wraps things up for another week of office hours. Remember to register for our live and weekly office hours if you haven't already. Go to cloudposse.com/office hours. Again, that's cloudposse.com/office hours. Thanks again, everyone, for sharing. We always learn so much from these calls. The recording of this call will be posted in the Office Hours channel and syndicated to our podcast at podcast.cloudposse.com. Again, that's podcast.cloudposse.com. See you all next week, same place, same time.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.